Actually, this is interesting. Sorry, I'm kind of rambling here.
No,
But
no, I'm rubbing off on you. Hey everybody, welcome to another episode of Auto Alchemy. Jeffrey here, as always, and I'm here today with Alex of INFP and INTJ Coffee. Alex, if you want to say a few words about yourself and your channel, I would greatly
sure.
appreciate it.
My name's Alex. I'm an INTJ. My friend Calypso and I, who's an INFP, have a YouTube channel called INTJ and INFP Coffee, where we talk about various MBTI personality theory related things.
It's a very good channel. I guarantee that if you're subscribed to my lowly channel, you're probably already subscribed to their channel, but if for whatever reason you've fallen through the cracks, you should check it out.
Thanks. And thanks for having me. I'm excited for this conversation.
Absolutely. Me too. The conversation that we're going to be having today is about writing and how writing can connect with the cognitive function model and typology in general. And I was actually sort of inspired by one of your videos, actually two of your videos, where you kind of talked about the perception axes and how they played out in writing, and then you even demonstrated some of your own writing, which I thought was pretty cool. I'm kind of attempting to gear up to share my own writing on my channel in the near future. So, writing is something that's near and dear to my heart, and I just thought that this was a nice, possible discussion to have. So, yeah, we're going to talk specifically about, well, ideally, I imagine this series as being like how each type might approach writing and how each type is going to have unique challenges and then obviously unique strengths that they can leverage to address those challenges. So Alex will be my exemplar of the INTJ, which is exciting. Hopefully I learn a lot from this maiden voyage here for future videos. Okay, so I guess just provide a bit of background. What is your relationship with writing? I know that you've at least written one piece of fiction. Do you tend to write more nonfiction, or like what does that relationship look like?
Yeah, I guess that one piece that we showed in our video is pretty much the only fictional writing I've ever attempted, and mainly because Calypso was like doing her own fictional writing at the time, and I was just curious of like what it would look like or what my process would be like if I attempted it. So it was kind of just like just this like little experiment for my own amusement, really. Well, I guess I create in my mind, I often think about scenarios that could happen in the future and stuff like that, but it's not like a full-on story with like an arc and that kind of thing. So I don't think my mind is really catered to that sort of fictional writing. And I don't think I even read a lot of fiction these days anymore. I think I do when I find like an author that I really like, and then I kind of tend to deplete like all the books that author has written.
But otherwise, that's very relatable to me. That's my style. Just drain them of everything that they have, and then on to the next one. But
even since I was young, like I think my mom was a very heavy reader, and she just likes just reading just like everything. And so like I was always like, we'd always go to the library and get books, but then I would always like read like a couple chapters of each and then just like leave it unless I really liked a book. I don't know. I think I'm just very particular for some reason with what fiction I relate to or actually want to consume or something. But I guess most of my writing experience is has been like within school pretty much, like writing for academic kind of purposes, or I guess like on our channel, like sometimes we write transcripts for like a more kind of like I don't know, more serious kind of video where it's more
where you're trying to disseminate information and you don't want to get it wrong.
Like,
do you think that when you did write I don't know how much more there was to the piece, because you guys pretty much just had like one page of it kind of shared in the corner on the screen, but I don't know if you completed that or if it was like just did it trail off? Like, what was did you manage to wrap it up?
Not really. Like I said, it was just more of an experiment for like, what if I were to attempt writing, what would it look like, and what would the process be? And And I think I found it hard to actually keep going, so that's why
Interesting.
I
Okay.
didn't feel
Yeah.
self-motivated to do it. I guess I felt like,
Yeah.
okay, I wrote like 3 or 4 paragraphs. I kind of experimented enough and then it became difficult for me, and
Yeah,
I was like,
like,
okay, I'll just leave it at that.
yeah, I could see that. Like, it didn't, it had fulfilled its sort of like NI purpose, and there was no more
Yeah.
room for it in your life, so why expend energy? How did that process compare to like a more academic process?
Oh,
Like, was there an outlining type of methodology? Like, how in general do you approach writing?
that's interesting. I think it was based on like an actual experience I had,
Mm-hmm.
and
I honestly kind of got that impression. I don't know why, but I was like, this is probably coming from like a very personal place, and it's, yeah,
yeah,
sort of being explored in fictive form.
yeah. And I think it's also kind of like some ideas I was exploring at the time. I guess actually it kind of relates to like in the video where I was like interviewing you for our showcasing series about how you asked me what my superpower could be, and I said like astral travel. And so I
Mm-hmm.
think that piece kind of goes into that whole like idea of like there being other dimensions that kind of somehow
Yeah, yeah,
energetically can come into ours
yeah.
and like, manipulate or something. So I guess that was sort of something I was just kind of getting into at the time and kind of like imagining what that would be like. For me, it was very much like I just had this visual, or maybe I was even thinking about that when I was like waiting for the subway or something like that. I was in the subway um, thinking about that idea of like different dimensions interacting with this world. And so when I sat down to write it, I kind of had that visual in my head of me in the subway and kind of, I guess, my experience of waiting for the subway and like my emotions and just the kind of sensory world that was there. And so I kind of just tried to be descriptive of that and kind of tie in that element of some sort of like weird and dark energy from another world interacting. And so yeah, I don't know, yeah, it's very much just kind of a reflection of what some ideas that I was mulling around in my head at the time and tying it to an actual physical experience I had and like describing that physical experience, I suppose.
And then, so in the context of an academic work, do you, obviously that's probably typically not coming from a personal kind of place. Like, how do you get started if you have, something that you would need to write academically?
I guess I'm in the gamma quadrant with like NTJs and SFPs,
Mm-hmm.
and I think we kind of tend to view the world through our very specific journey through life and our own experiences and stuff like that. And so I do think even in academic writing, and I was always trying to relate it as much to my own experiences as possible, because I think that's just the sort of wealth of information I have to draw from with
Yeah.
my set of cognitive functions. So I think with like English class and stuff, and even like in university, I had like some anthropology classes. I always tried to, or I guess just something that my NI likes is kind of the idea of like gender studies and like how we are kind of socialized into like being these male and female roles, and like
Yeah.
how much of that is like natural biology and how much of that is just like our social construct that we kind of are perpetuating.
Mm-hmm.
In my high school English class, Kafka's The Metamorphosis, we had to write an
Mm-hmm.
essay on that, and I don't think it had anything to do with like gender or, or exploring gender. I don't think that was the point of that book at all, but
I don't think that
somehow
that was, yeah.
but that's kind of what my NI had in storage, basically. Like I think NI just kind of has a few key ideas through which we
Yeah.
view the entire world, and that's one of mine. So I kind of tried to pick apart, because I think there was like the guy and his sister and then his mother and father, so there was like 2 men and 2 women featured in
Yeah.
that book. So I tried to somehow pick apart this whole thing and talk about, I don't remember what my thesis was, but something about gender studies, when like, yeah, the book had nothing
Huh.
to do with it really, but it was like, but that's how I view the world, and that's the only way I could get something
No.
out of that book, if that makes sense.
That's, yeah, no, that's a completely valid approach. It's been too long since I've read it, so I am at risk of rambling and completely butchering it, so I think I'll just leave it at that. But yeah, I think there's something to that. That's cool.
Yeah, and I can even in like the more sciences side, um, this could be an Enneagram thing too, but I wonder if it's also like an FI thing, or
Mm-hmm.
even just like a Gamma Quadrant thing, where I kind of want to see things through my own experience. I had like a research project in my final year, and for that one, I was really stubborn, and I wanted to do something that was like completely my own original thought. Like I guess I could have just like, I think for those kind of things, for like undergraduate projects, they your supervisor can kind of just like hand you an idea, or like
Mm-hmm.
hand you kind of a project within someone else's project, which is kind of what I did, because it involved field work, so I didn't have the funds to like go, and I had to kind of latch on to like some other graduate students
Oh
project and
yeah.
do my own thing, but I
Hmm.
still really wanted it to be something that like has never been done before, and something that came from me, and from, yeah, I don't know, from my own experiences. I think for INTJs, we kind of need to do our information gap. We can't, I imagine with NE, it's a bit different. Like you can probably come up with ideas via like, I don't know, talking out loud, or combining different, I don't know. I think
Yeah.
that, but yeah, you know what I mean, right?
Yeah.
It's
Yeah.
something that you can probably do in your head, and just, yeah, kind of like alchemy, kind of, in a sense, right? Like combine
Mm-hmm.
different factors and see what happens. But I think with the NISE axis, we have to actually just go out there and experience things in order to get new ideas, or just new like
Yeah.
content on which we can write on. So at first, without having gone out to see the actual field environment where I would be doing the research, I think it was hard for me to come up with an idea. So they kind of were just like, oh, this is an aspect of the thing we're not studying, so you can do this. And I was like, okay. And then for the
Mm-hmm.
next summer, I had already been in that environment. So I think I was able to kind of like be there physically, and kind of think about the physical ecological processes that were happening in that forest, and what the graduate students were doing, and what was left to be done. And I think I actually thought of an idea that hadn't, at least to my research, hadn't like really been studied like that much. So
Mm-hmm.
I don't know. Yeah, that could be like, I mean, I'm an Enneagram 5, but I have like 4 in my tri-type, and I'm also 5.4. So that could also be the stubborn 4 being like, no, I want to be unique.
It definitely seems like a five wing four thing, but also like a. I mean, because I feel the same impulse, but I think that it manifests in different ways.
Mm.
And I am also a five wing four, which we've talked about, but I've never mentioned that on my channel. So
Okay.
here's the announcement. Yeah, I don't know where I was going with that. Oh, I guess I was just going to say that it's kind of interesting how all of these different conceptual territories overlap. So naturally, it seems like a five wing four thing, but I also see sort of like this NIFI kind of operation in tandem. Like that's sort of what that looks like in your experience anyway. Like here's how the five wing four experience might manifest through your functions. One reason that I was excited about talking to Alex is that, because I am an ENTP and she's an INTJ, there's sort of this weird functional mirroring going on, and I can see certain similarities in our overall approach to thinking about things and thinking about writing as well. But at the same time, there are naturally differences. And so you're talking about how you like to view things through that personal lens, and for me, it's like whenever I would have a writing project for a class that wasn't fiction, or sometimes even if it was fiction, the whole thing, it was kind of like a puzzle. Like I didn't really care about tying it to any sort of personal history of mine, or even anything that I believed per se. It was like, how do I write to the parameters specified by the professor,
Mm.
and like what is a topic that I could probably explore adequately. It felt kind of like a game, like saying the right things in order to, just survive and cope. I didn't really care to make my experience in academia, too personal, which I think is a problem in its own right. But
Maybe not. It's interesting how maybe you interpret it, because I don't think it's necessarily that I'm trying to make it personal, but I think it's just like that's all I have to work
with.
with.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's like I think kind of approaching it through like that sort of a perspective where it's like, okay, let me try to figure out some sort of like universal kind of, I don't know, message contained within this literature or like within the scientific, literature or whatever is like, yeah, I think that's just something that I struggle with. So then after much, I think it's really hard for me to come up with a topic too. So often when I would end up doing, like, for example, that metamorphosis essay, I think that was after like me really, really struggling to figure out some sort of topic to do. Probably because I feel like I kind of understand the general takeaway from the metamorphosis, I guess you could say, right? But I guess the general takeaway would be me like maybe writing like 2 paragraphs on it or something. I don't think I'd be able to expand that with enough content to like do an entire essay on it.
Yeah.
So I think I really struggled with like, okay, I need to find something that I have enough to say on that I can actually do a full essay. So when I chose that topic, even I think I was like, oh, this probably is a stretch. I don't know if this really,
But it's all that you felt you could do.
Yeah, it's all that I felt like I could do.
Wow. Yeah. And from my perspective, I could like look at that story through any lens I wanted to and just kind of run with it and extrapolate and probably BS a little bit. To be honest, like that's kind of what it is.
Yeah.
One big takeaway from the videos that you did with Calypso, so you guys were focusing on perception primarily, and you kind of talked about how the NI-SE axis is more concerned with plot, and then that NE-SI, at least when Calypso was looking at the different writing excerpts, she was focusing on the actual stylings and didn't care so much about like the progression of events. First of all, I guess, do you still feel like that's how you see it? Do you think that's an appropriate way of thinking about it? And then I want to have kind of like an open conversation about the thinking and feeling functions and how those might also inform a writer.
Yeah, for sure. I think so. And I think it even kind of mimics like how we actually perceive real life, which is maybe why it comes out in writing that way. I think with the SENI axis, we just need the progression of time in order to find meaning in things, because the point of meaning, I think, is more with like the internal functions. So I think NI derives meaning from things on that axis, but with NI, it's like you need a pattern, and with a pattern, you need kind of time of like repeated instances, sort of.
Yeah.
So I think that's just how we view life. Like I think there's meaning in progression of things for us on that axis, whereas I think on your axis, I think the point that has meaning is like the SI things, and that is probably almost like a timeless thing. Like if you have this SI association, it was, in the past and in the future and in the present, and it's kind of like it's always there. So I think with writing, it's probably like just finding all these little SI elements and kind of assembling them to kind of bring meaning, even if it's not necessarily in order of time or in order of like how that character would like progress through real time in their journey, but more about like all their little associative meanings. And so I think the NI-SE axis is kind of more plot based, just because that's how you experience the world. That's how we experience life. We're kind of more plot based in our own in our own life, if that makes sense.
That's interesting. That's I guess that's one. Well, I've already posed a question that I guess we're still in the middle of, so we can talk about the judgment functions.
Yeah, I think with TE, it's more, I guess, within the academic style of writing. I'm not sure how necessarily it would come up with fictional writing, but I think with the academic style writing, it's mostly just trying to show proof of whatever argument. And I think with TE, it's just a lot of separate facts and separate examples. So It's like I feel like I know my outline, I know which points I have to kind of show proof for, and then I just kind of go through that and find if like one or two or how many examples I need of those sort of things. And it kind of feels almost like foraging, kind of. Like, I feel like with TI, there probably is some ultimate big connection, but with TE, it's very much just like separate instances. Like, okay, I just need to prove this little part of the logic, and let me just find something, and I'll insert it there, and then let me just find that, and I'll insert it there. And it's kind of there's some disconnect with that, but I guess the connection is within maybe more of the perception part, with the NI kind of having some sort of tie throughout the whole thing.
I definitely think that makes sense. And I guess you wouldn't see that method in fiction writing all too much. Although I'm trying to imagine what that would look like, and I can't really... I know that I've read fiction, like works of fiction that have citations and footnotes, and I don't know, that's almost like a vaguely TE sort of thing, but maybe that's just a veneer of extroverted thinking. I feel like the feeling functions, I think that those are probably easier to tie to writing than thinking, at least for me. Because typically whenever I write, as somebody who, well, it's kind of bizarre, honestly. So because I'm very aware of the possible emotional experiences that I could be evoking through a piece of writing, it can be exhausting. But so I just finished writing a novel not too long ago, and I like try very hard to incorporate as much like NI energy and SE. Like I try to like think, how can I make this have something for everyone, so that it's like an enjoyable experience for everyone. And I do think that that's sort of like that's an aspect of any kind of rhetoric, where you have to be aware of that. What are you generating in the other person, and how can you leverage that sometimes for good or for ill? And I suppose TE could also be, in its own way, leveraged for good or ill. But
yeah, no, that's great. That's actually a question I had to ask you, because I guess this doesn't necessarily apply to fictional writing, but maybe it does actually. But I guess I have like an FE blind spot, as I guess both INTJs and ISTJs do. And I do think when I'm writing, I can kind of be blind to like the emotional tone that I'm conveying. And that actually even happened once when we were writing a script with Calypso for one of our videos, and there was something that Calypso brought up that was like, she was like, whoa, no, that I don't think you meant to convey that, but the tone that you conveyed was like really like not good. So I was like, okay, sorry. Yeah, go ahead, change that. I think it was something like it was like in the introduction of a video, and it was like, I guess we are going to like, tell you about blah, 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 blah. And I think I used like the word like inform or something like that. Like, we are going to inform you. And she's like, oh, that sounds like you're really condescending.
Like you are the INTJ professor in front of the class and you're smacking the chalkboard.
Yeah, and I was like, okay, I see that. I didn't like that. That never occurred to me. And I was like, oopsie, my bad. I didn't mean to suggest that.
That's funny.
But yeah, I think, but that's really cool. I was going to ask you if you are kind of aware of like, what you are communicating in sort of like an FE sense via your writing.
Yeah, painfully so. Honestly, sometimes it's like, it feels like the agenda is to persuade other people that the TI framework and the NE territory that I'm exploring are both like worthwhile, and sort of like bring people into the fold a little bit. Like, I don't know, it's like my only way of, because I am FI blind, right? So for me, like, this is sort of going to be rambly, but for me, I've had to like actively create a value compass so that I like know, like I have something to consult so that I can like make decisions that are like in accordance with how I want to live my life. And ironically, usually it's just like synonyms for my cognitive functions. Like,
right.
Oh yeah, that's right. I value, creativity and ingenuity and, so on and so
Right.
forth. But it's nice to kind of like anchor yourself a little bit. But generally, that's like the most that I have. And for me to I think feel the same sort of authenticity that a standard FI user would feel, it's more like I have to express like my NE and my TI. Like this is authenticity for me, and this
Right.
is like my personal, and so yeah, I try to like use my awareness of FE to like kind of like massage people a little bit into being receptive to like this thing that feels very very personal in a way, and very, like here are things that I've been thinking through for a long time and trying to articulate them and reconcile them, and I'm building something. I'm constructing this elaborate architecture of an experience. I feel like I'm creating like an aesthetic machine sometimes, but part of the machine is weirdly enough like involving other people's feelings. It's hard to like a roller coaster. I mean, that would also involve other people's feelings. I just want to
Right.
give a good experience and share this machine that I've created.
Interesting. I
Yeah.
wonder, when you're writing, do you think about like the motivations of your characters?
Yeah, I do.
Yeah.
It doesn't come so naturally to me. That's another thing that I kind of have had to force myself to do, I suppose.
Right.
I I did want to say that I feel like in order to become a better writer, I've had to sort of like tap into my INTJ shadow a little
Mm.
bit. So typically I can feel this analysis paralysis. If I'm looking at a blank page, I'm sort of overwhelmed by all the different directions that I could take, and it's like it's hard to get started. Although typically, I guess ENTPs are thought of as being like starters.
Right.
But it can be hard to get started just because if I'm wanting to create something that is good and of quality, then I just don't know what to work with. It's too much. Like the infinite possibilities are too great,
Mm.
and but so I've kind of like tried to allow myself to cultivate sort of like an NI vision. Like I occasionally will, if I'm writing a story, I'll just think of like a singular moment in a person's life. Like here's a moment of epiphany or like a eureka type moment, or just like a really meaningful kind of emotionally charged moment for somebody, for some character, and then I try to reverse engineer it. So that like that will constrain all of the possibilities, but then I still have like a smaller infinity within those constraints. So I don't know how
Right.
I'm going to get there, but it at least gives me something to aim towards.
Yeah, no,
And
that's
then
cool. I think it sounds like you're
yeah,
using your SI, right, to kind of,
yeah,
right. So you're
yeah,
thinking of this kind of one SI association you have of some sort of instance or event that conveys some sort of emotional meaning or some, yeah, some sort of meaning,
hmm
right? And then, yeah, that's really cool.
yeah. And then I think that TI has a tendency to want to reinvent the wheel sometimes. Um, like discover like a methodology or a way of thinking this through that is entirely my own,
Mhm.
and um, well, I don't know. Maybe you'll disagree with this, um, but I think that sometimes TE can recognize like there's no need to reinvent the wheel if we already have the wheel. So I'm just going to use the wheel and then focus on the things that are more important to me. So, there are so many different tools that you can use as a writer, so many different structures that can kind of feel arbitrary, or like this is like the three act structure, or whatever. Like
Right.
or like creating like a list of motivations. Like I've had to deal with like the infinite possibility. I've honestly kind of like jumped to using these things that feel very arbitrary, but then it's like you get to play around within those parameters, and it's still not stifling or suffocating. It almost feels like liberating of my NE in a way.
Yeah, no, that's so cool. That's so like, I guess TI and SI trying to like, yeah, set up some sort of. That's cool that you were use the word arbitrary, because I guess that's from my from my perspective. I guess that's how I would kind of consider it. Well, in some sense, I guess. TI and
Mm-hmm.
SI is kind of, yeah, like these arbitrary rules that you just kind of set based on some sort of internal, I guess, metrics. And then,
Yeah.
yeah, and that contains or directs maybe the NEFE. So,
Mm-hmm.
yeah, that's really interesting. So I guess for you, idea generation is like kind of overwhelming to the point where it's inhibiting.
It's, yeah, simply because there's no sort of selection principle,
Yeah.
right? Like there's no method of prioritization, or like that also feels arbitrary. Like I had this one good idea, but now I'm having another one, and like which one do I decide to pursue? So I
Right.
have to make some hard decisions that are based more on like the thematics of the thing, or like once you kind of get those pieces in place, you have some pillars to hold up whatever sort of exploratory thing you want to do.
Yeah. Yeah, it's hard to figure out how TE could fit into um, fictional writing. But I feel
Mm-hmm.
like, yeah, it could fit into, like, I guess the process of it, maybe not. Because I think, yeah, TE probably is more just concerned with, like, conveying what is true based on some sort of external evidence or something like that. So
Mm-hmm.
that may come across in fictional writing. Maybe like TE users might show kind of the reasons for why things happened in the kind of external world or something like that, might really kind of paint out a picture so you can determine for yourself, like, yes, okay, this happened because of that, or this is like a logical progression because of this external thing.
Yeah.
When you were talking about TI reinventing the wheel, yeah, I don't think I relate to that. Like, I guess with academic writing, it's easier because they kind of tell you how to write it. Basically, they pretty
Yeah.
much tell you, okay, this is the structure for, you know, more of the humanities. This is a structure for the sciences. But um,
Hmm.
yeah, I think with fictional writing, I kind of did maybe like one of my favorite authors is Haruki Murakami. So
Mm.
I could
Yeah.
see myself kind of mimicking his style with that little excerpt that I wrote that we showed
Yeah.
on my channel. So that could be my TE being like, okay, or maybe even like my FI being like, yes, I I like this, and my TE being like, okay, I'm able to execute something kind of similar to this.
Yeah. Yeah. Execute feels like the right term to
Right.
use. So, Alex and Calypso actually just recently released a video where they were comparing the different types to RPG classes, and Alex had actually selected the Alchemist for ENTP, which felt very, very good for me, given that alchemy is in my my YouTube title, my YouTube name, um, and that also relates to my writing process a little bit, where essentially, so I kind of draw bits and pieces from everything. There's that quote about how like a good artist borrows, but a great artist steals.
Okay.
And I feel like I'm not calling myself a great artist by any means, but I'm trying to abide by that mentality. So I don't know, it's hard to explain. So in my novel, for example, there's one segment where um, there's like this CIA documentation that's leaked onto the internet, and in order to do that, like I looked up actual like leaked documents and tried to like replicate, like the way that the header is formatted and like the font styling, and I would like black out certain names, and then like so I kind of like drained that potential that particular avenue of what I could, and then I would jump on to like, okay, well, this is supposed to take place. This particular section is supposed to take place on a cruise ship, so now I'm going to watch a ton of YouTube videos about, like, or just because I've never been on a cruise ship, I'm going to watch a ton of, like, home videos from cruise ships, and, like, here's a walkthrough tour of a cruise ship, and then I just, like, take that, and I try to, like, internalize it and make it, like, part of my huge structure of knowledge, which sort of ties into, like, what you said earlier about how you have to have, like, lived the experience
Right.
to really incorporate it into your worldview. But that's not necessary for me. But yeah, so eventually I just like fuse all of these elements together and then create something that feels like my own personal, like I've put my stamp on it by exploring these things in a way that only I I could.
I guess, would you consider that process like maybe SI? Like you're kind of looking for information and then you are internalizing that experience kind of in, yeah, like you have your own, you're developing your own associations or something, and then you're using those SI to like fuel some NE ideas or something like that.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. When I know that I don't have the memory, like the database in my head to
Right.
actually create the experience or explore the ideas that I want to explore, then I have to kind of gobble up some sort of like sensory details, and
Right.
then yeah.
But I guess the idea precedes it, right? So you already kind of know
Yeah.
what. Okay.
But of course, like that's sort of the trouble with any is then I like stumble upon something that I never would have considered. Like, oh, I didn't know that this cruise ship, like some cruise ships have like this kind of event, and then I'll want to like weave that sort of event, like a karaoke night or whatever, into the story, and so you end up like traveling down new paths because of all the new storehouse of information that you're building.
Yeah. Yeah, that's interesting. I think there is a similarity with NI and SE, and but yeah, I guess for you it's kind of like, I guess in the kind of alchemist stereotype, it's more like elemental. It's more like maybe thematic in a sense of like, okay, you're trying to find some sort of sensory data that matches, yeah, like the theme or the, I
Yeah,
don't know, component
yeah,
that you're missing, right? And I think with my axis, it's like when I'm missing sensory data, it's like I'm just missing enough data to ascertain whether this NI pattern is like true, or
yeah.
maybe if there's like various kind of other factors within the NI pattern that I need to account for. So I think like sometimes when Calypso and I talk about something on our channel um, and we're tying it to the cognitive functions, but it might just be based off of maybe like a handful of people that we know in our life, and we kind of see this pattern. Um, but it's always really interesting when people in the comments chime in as to whether they fit that pattern or not. And
Mm-hmm.
I think for me, that's kind of like collecting SE data in that sense.
Mm-hmm.
So
Yeah.
I guess it's like, yeah, I guess the nature of the SE data to inform NI is more, a, yeah, more about, I guess, whether it already fits this pattern or if it doesn't fit this pattern, but it's kind of in a contextual position to either prove or disprove it, or something like that, right?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Um, and I
Mm.
guess, yeah, I guess the nature of SI data is a little bit different.
Yeah, I think so. Although I don't know that I can articulate well the nature of that difference. I mean, in a sense, it's almost like I want to know. I can sort of like fabricate or simulate what it would be like to have that as a personal experience, and so then I can like write from that experience.
Mm-hmm.
So in a way, I don't need to live through it. Although I'm sure that I'm missing a lot of things that I would otherwise pick up on if I had like gone through all of these things that I'm researching. But yeah, I am sort of like simulating, I think is a good word. That's what the SI is short
Right.
for me.
Yeah. Yeah, it's interesting. I guess like when I, yeah, pick up the SE data, it doesn't necessarily have to, like if it's someone else's experience, it doesn't, I don't
Hmm.
necessarily have to simulate it. Maybe I'm more using TE to like evaluate whether it logically fits the structure that I had
Yeah.
predicted as is occurring, or if
Uh,
it doesn't. And yeah, yeah, it's interesting. I don't think I put myself in my shoes of that person and be like, okay, if I was this type and experiencing what they are experiencing, it's, which makes sense because I guess that would be the like internalization of the data, which kind of is like inherently SI in that sense.
hmm I was gonna ask, do you feel like there's any danger? So I guess what I want to know is, do you feel like you can lose sight of
Mm.
certain SE data points um, in favor of, or you happen to privilege the NI perspective over that?
Yeah. And I think even, maybe I'm wrong with this, but I think even high SE users might relate with this too. Because I think with SE, we're not really internalizing anything. It's kind of probably like with NE for you, it's like you just have all these ideas, right? And if you don't maybe capitalize on it like right in that instant, it's probably just like
Yeah.
gone, and maybe you can
Yeah.
stumble upon it again someday. But yeah, so
Yeah.
in preparing for this video, one of the tips I had was like when we have like random little SE anecdotes, just like write it down, because that's what I've been trying to do recently, is like any kind of MBTI related thing, because I guess that's like, you know, what I would be writing is just like MBTI related
Yeah.
stuff. So when
Yeah.
every time I'm like, oh, I was with like in, you know, ESFJ and this little thing happened, and it made me think, oh, is that tied to this cognitive function? And it's not enough to be an NI pattern yet, because I maybe haven't interacted enough with, you know, that certain type or whatever. So
Yeah.
so if it doesn't go into that level of pattern, it won't be internalized in my head and I won't retain it.
Yeah.
So then, yeah, absolutely.
Okay.
It's something like that. I would just lose it. So I've kind of taken to myself, if I ever have a little thought like that, I just like, I have a pile of little sticky notes and I like write them down. And then later I try to go through them and I try to like see if I can coalesce them into new patterns. Because yeah, it's true. Otherwise I'll come through this potentially useful data and it'll just escape, and I'll never, well, maybe I'll encounter it again in a different experience, but I could just lose the value of that experience itself.
Yeah. That's so amazing. Like, that experiences can be so similar yet so different. For me, it's like I wake up in the middle of the night and have 50 things percolating in my brain, and they're not, you know, not related to any tangible experience I've had. It's like, what if I don't even know. I don't want to embarrass myself by giving away my secrets here. But, you know, and then I have like a pile of sticky notes that I'll jot things down on, and, you know, I will allow myself to disturb my sleep in order to like jot down some silly idea that in the morning usually seems laughable, but, you know, sometimes I can find gold.
Right. Yeah. Yeah, it's interesting. So I guess with you, it's on like the intuitive level of like making connections between kind of seemingly random things, and for me it's like more real life experiences, and like, oh, okay, yeah, let me write down all my real life experiences in case this could inform a pattern or something like that. So yeah, that's cool.
Yeah. So a natural follow-up to that question for me then is, what would you think that pure NI would look like in writing form? Because I can easily imagine that pure NE would just be this stream of consciousness flow of maybe half garbage, half gold, like I mentioned earlier. So yeah, NI, what does that look like?
I think it would just be a bunch of predictions that has no basis of like whether they're true or not. But maybe, I guess it might depend on. Yeah, I feel like maybe
I can see like Confucius.
Just like, I don't know, or just like really, like, I don't know, spiritual hippie stuff, where it's like, yes, the world is all connected based on this like one thing that has like no reference to like anything. I think that's what my NI does. It's like, yeah, I tend to see this pattern, and then I tend to like, I don't know, give it more power than it potentially has, and try to make like everything fit under the scope of this one idea. And then through SE, I'm like, oh, okay, well, actually there's this caveat, and so this other factor might change how this initial factor operates, and then I get more SE. I'm like, oh, okay, actually there's a bunch of factors that can determine how that initial factor operates. So I think pure NI would just be like, oh yes, I see this one pattern and it applies to everything, and like
yeah. So what would you say are the greatest pitfalls for an INTJ as a writer? What areas are they maybe neglecting? Where should they, you know, put their energies as far as improving?
Yeah, I think it kind of relates to what we were just talking about, and I think it's the fact that we can lose the actual data itself, or the actual like sensory information. So yeah, it's hard, because unfortunately I feel like when you're going through school, I don't necessarily have any good tips for this, because I feel like now that I'm aware that like, okay, we'll be producing MBTI content in the, you know, foreseeable future, that's what I'll be doing. So now I'm aware of like keeping track of all these little SE things that happen to me, in case that might inform some sort of NI idea later on. But I think when you're like in a school situation, that's a lot harder to
Mm-hmm.
do. So I mean, okay, I guess the main pitfall is that that I think we can often see like a um, idea in very simplistic or refined or kind of very like a very synthesized, reduced version of that idea, and then we have trouble expanding it out into something that actually fleshes that out in detail.
Mm-hmm.
Um, so yeah, I guess, and I think we're also very slow to think of an idea because I guess, like I was talking about earlier, if the subject matter doesn't really fit into like your current NI lens through which you view the world, it might be hard to find some sort of idea that you can even talk about.
Mm-hmm.
Um, so I think just giving yourself time to kind of sift through as much information as possible so that you can find like a singular idea. I guess it's kind of, it sucks to think about. And I don't envy the people, the
Yeah.
INTJs or any high NI users who are still in school. But I think in order to come across like a singular idea, you just have to expose yourself to a lot of SE information. And I
Mm-hmm.
think the hard thing about that too is that maybe textbooks and like literature and stuff that you might kind of use as research for these essays might be more kind of like SI oriented information. Like
Yeah.
someone's already kind of determined what is like the meaning behind this information, or maybe someone's already fabricated it into some sort of context of like, I don't know, this is the overall idea that we're trying to convey. So it's,
Mm-hmm.
yeah, I don't know, because I feel like it's true with anything that I've written in school, it's been just informed actually more on my own experiences and not like based on like the textbooks or the or the actual literature itself, or
Yeah.
like, which is, I know that's so warped, but it's kind of true. Um, so maybe, I don't know, gosh, maybe just the advice would be like not to beat yourself up too much on like
Mm-hmm.
on a system that maybe just isn't really um, kind of made for your cognitive functions,
Yeah.
and just kind of let yourself, yeah, I don't know. I think writing has always honestly been like a lifelong struggle with me, and
Mm-hmm.
I don't know if other INTJs would be able to relate to that. So I think I enjoy writing now that I do it at my own pace, and I'm kind of letting myself go through life and collect information and write as I collect life information, and not forcing myself to write because there is like an assignment that needs to be done. I think that
Yeah.
is maybe contrary to like our cognitive functions and how we yeah, how we just like view the world and how we go through life. So
Mm-hmm.
um yeah, maybe, I guess maybe my advice would be just like, if you have, even if it's a very far stretch in terms of how it relates to the subject that you're supposed to be writing an assignment on, if you have some sort of way to relate life your own life experiences or your own NI kind of construct onto that subject matter, then maybe just do that from the get-go, because I feel like I have always
Yeah.
been like trying, yeah, I always like, oh, like I could write it based on, like I say, like I think I've probably on multiple classes have somehow interpreted the subject matter through like some sort of gender studies construct, because that's something that my NI is interested in, or maybe even my FI
Yeah.
values or something like that, right? So it's my own personal lens, and I think I've really suffered by being like, oh, but that's not related enough to the thing, and like I have to do something
Yeah.
that's more in line with the subject, and then I waste all this time, and then like a week before it's due, I'm like, okay, let me just do it on this idea because that's all I got, and then I have to
Yeah.
like really rush doing this thing, which I think NI DOMs probably aren't really great at writing quickly either. I think we need time for that, so maybe just concede to the fact that idea generation is difficult for us, and if you just
Yeah.
have that one idea, then just go for it, and then give yourself as much time to write instead of suffering over finding the best idea that pertains the most to the subject.
Yeah. Yeah. I think that's really, really good advice for the young INTJ. I was gonna say something pretty similar. Not that I can't speak from a place of personal experience, but I do think that there's no shame and if that's the way that you function best, then
Right.
you're gonna get like a lot more mileage out of the approach that makes sense to you than to try to emulate anybody else's approach.
Yeah.
There's also no shame. Here's something that I think most NTs could probably benefit from, except for maybe ENTJs. I don't know. Um, I don't know why I'm excluding them, but it was really hard for me to approach my professors and actually have like real dialogues
Yeah.
about like, here's what I want to write about. I know that it might be falling sort of outside of the parameters. How can we kind of find a middle ground? I think that that would maybe be useful to INTJs because you guys are typically very bright, and I think that you could defend that connection that you want to make to whatever this NI framework is in a way that would like motivate a professor or instructor to want to like help you say, oh, okay, yeah, like I see how you could make that connection, and here are other bits of literature that you might want to look at that
Right.
actually explore similar territory. That's, I think, kind of just like trusting and embracing that as part of yourself and being willing to put it out into the world, I think is probably beneficial.
Yeah, that's really good. And I think that kind of speaks to like our FE blind spot as well. Because I think,
Mm-hmm.
maybe correct me if I'm wrong, but I feel like with FE you kind of see the world as a more kind of like human thing. I think like maybe TE sees it as more of just like all these logical things that are happening, but maybe with FE you kind of see it as like a bunch of people who, are working to, like a teacher is there to help their students, right? And like
Yeah.
to like an FE blind person, that kind of thing never occurred to me. It's just like, oh, okay, school is just a structure where kids go and teachers are there just to get paid and this is their job. And I would never even make
Yeah.
that connection of like, oh yeah, I can go to a teacher for help because that is something that they might want to do for me. And
Yeah. I could build a relationship if I wanted to.
right.
Yeah. No, I mean, I'm aware of like, yeah, I guess for me, until recently, I hadn't focused too much on my FE, to be
Right.
honest. This is sort of a new phase of my life, but
Yeah.
yeah, when I was in college, I knew that the world could operate in that way and that
Right.
people could build relationships. I just wasn't confident enough that I could build one with, a stodgy old professor, Not to derail the conversation, but that's like a weird regret that I have, is not building those relationships back then.
Right. That's interesting. Yeah, I think as maybe just not having FE, that's not even a regret. Like I think I know now
Yeah.
I'm like aware that that's how the world works, but I think,
Mm-hmm.
or I think, yeah, I think the world works both in like TE and FE terms, probably. Like there's truth to both, and we just only can kind of
Yeah.
maybe see one of it through our cognitive functions. But yeah, I think for me more now I'm like it's more of a relief that I'm outside of like structure that relies on FE so heavily because I know I'm
Yeah.
just like never going to be that good at it anyways. But
Yeah.
yeah, I think that could be probably good advice to maybe any thinker when they're young who hasn't really tapped into their feeling function yet. So
Yeah,
probably
for
the
sure.
SDs too.
Yeah. Or even, yeah, I mean, maybe those younger INTJs don't really have like the FI, NI, like cooperation going on in their psyches, and maybe that's going to be harder. So maybe,
Yeah.
I mean, have you always felt that you were fairly connected to your sense of internal values?
No, I think that is something I came into maybe in my early 20s
Mm-hmm.
when that sort of started to kind of, I don't know, ring alarm bells in my conscious. I guess,
Yeah.
I don't know, but yeah, I think, yeah, maybe that's a good advice too, of just like being confident in what you value for
Mm-hmm.
young INTJs,
Yeah.
or maybe even any young TJ who hasn't really developed their FI yet. And maybe like if you're in school and you're like, oh well, I have this singular idea, and if you're like, oh, okay, but I value it and I can see the reasons why I value it, and therefore there is some sort of intrinsic worth
Mm-hmm.
on that idea, then maybe that would motivate them more to just be like, okay, well, this is kind of, yeah, to motivate them more to do it from their singular perspective, whatever the writing
Yeah.
assignment is. But I think maybe because I wasn't so tapped into my FI and my, I guess, only judgment kind of evaluation system was TE, I was kind of maybe just looking at it through that lens and being like, okay, well, is there, I guess, value in writing this piece on something that is kind of a little bit tangential to the class that I'm taking, like maybe, or not even value, that sounds more FE, but like will it be graded well, I guess, in a more TE sense, like, you know, will this meet the rubric of what they're asking me to do, if it's kind of a little bit not so much. But I think if you have that FI and be like, well, no, but you know what, I think if there's value in it for me, that means that there is something that I have to share, and there is some sort of value in it. So
yeah, learning to trust that is probably difficult. I don't know what FI is.
Oh man.
Awesome. I think that's a good note to go out on. So thank you so much, Alex, for appearing on the channel. I feel like we had a great conversation, and I think that anybody who watches it is going to have something to take away from it.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you so much for I think this can kind of tie into our whole conversation, but thank you for having the idea to actually do this, because I think I was like, oh yeah, you know, you're an ENTP and this is such a great opportunity to kind of look at something where because we have that mirror cognitive function situation going on, but like for the life of me, I could not think of a good idea to go on. So thank you for being the idea generator here. And because of that initial spark, I actually, and it's cool. I think I pretty much prepared a lot of notes, but kind of through your more NE style of like connecting ideas, we pretty much covered everything that I wanted to say anyway.
Yeah, I consulted my notes too, and I was like, oh, looks like we've already done this.
Yeah.
Good job. Awesome. Well, thank you again, and thanks everybody for tuning in, and we'll talk to you next time.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Bye.
Bye.